We're going to go ahead and get started in just a minute, so if I could ask folks to take their seats, that would be great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I think you have my job. I had your job. It's water.
Except for the top. Yes.
Before we get started, I'm just going to ask folks if they please silence their phones. If they have their phones with them, take the moment now to do that. Good evening. I want to thank you all so much for joining us this evening, for coming out tonight, and want to let you know my name is Michelle Famula. I have the privilege of being the president of the Yolo County League of Women Voters, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here this evening. As many of you know, our countywide league formed last year as a merger of the Davis and Woodland local leagues as members of the National League of Women Voters. Founded over 100 years ago, our league is a nonpartisan civic organization, and we're dedicated to empowering voters and promoting democracy. We believe that the key to a strong democracy is an educated electorate. Our league wishes to thank all of our attendees this evening, and we recognize that these are challenging times with many diverse perspectives. We ask that everyone here this evening treat each other with respect and appreciation. We value everyone's beliefs and opinions, and we require that all dialogue and actions are constructive. Anyone acting in a disruptive or disrespectful manner may be asked to leave. Tonight's forum is not about a ballot issue, and it is not a candidate debate. It is a public discussion of affordable housing, an issue currently important to all residents in all of our communities, north and south, rural and urban, small town and city. Tonight, we hope to inspire your interest and your imagination as you explore the affordable housing issue and consider the impacts that can result when our community comes together to find answers to this confounding question: affordable housing. How do we get it built? At this time, I'd like to introduce Kate Curry, co-chair of our League Housing Committee, to explain tonight's program format and the opportunities for audience participation. Kate and Mary Jo Bryan assembled our panel and planned this evening event. Thank you very much, Kate and Mary Jo.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you to our panelists, John Curry, Ian Evans, and Bill Pride, for sharing their time and expertise with us tonight. In just a moment, they will introduce themselves more fully. Then questions that the Housing Committee has prepared will be answered, sometimes by just one of our panelists, sometimes by more. Our goal tonight is to leave the audience with a broad understanding of the challenges and the possible avenues to getting affordable housing built as the state mandates. And if 2 or 3 panelists have something to contribute to that understanding, they will. Throughout the panel, we will be collecting your audience questions. Please use the cards you were given at the door. Did everyone pick one up? Okay, great. We will collect cards by 7:30 or so, but you may pass them down anytime you wish, and we can collect them, while the panel is continuing. We will then ask our panelists to answer your questions. Last, we will take some refreshment and provide an opportunity for interested audience members to talk with representatives of various local housing organizations. So, let's get started. John, will you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do as it relates to housing?
Do I swing?
So, John Curry, Yolo Land Trust Executive Director, and a longtime farm family in Yolo and Solano County. And so our intersection with affordable housing really is both as land protection is required by developers. That is an element where we interact with developers as they are fulfilling mitigation obligations, and then also as it intersects with the desire to include farm worker housing on future projects in the rural portions of the county.
And Ian?
Good evening, everybody. Ian Evans. I'm the Executive Director for Yolo County Housing and the President and CEO of our nonprofit affordable housing company, New Hope Community Development Corporation. I've been with the Housing Authority for a little over 3 years now, and prior to that, I was what's called a branch director at Yolo County Health and Human Services. I oversaw a whole host of services and supports there, including adult mental health and substance use services, veteran services, in-home supportive services, and homeless services were all under my team. And I think the intersection of mental health, substance use, and the homeless service work that I was doing at the county really gave me a lens into seeing the need for additional affordable housing opportunities for a wide variety of populations. And so when this opportunity became available, I was excited to step into this role. I was born and raised in Yolo County. I'm now raising my family in Yolo County, and so I'm fortunate to have a house in Davis that I wouldn't have had if my grandparents didn't buy it in the 80s, and sell it to me for very cheap when my family needed to buy a home. And so I hope that we can have enough affordable housing that if my kids want to settle in Yolo County and in Davis, that they have an opportunity.
And Bill?
Good evening, my name is Bill Pride. I'm Executive Director of Yolo Community Builders. And my background in housing goes back probably about 30 or so years. I was trained as an attorney and graduated from George back in 1982, and I was a practicing attorney doing divorce work of all things for 17, 18 years. And after doing that for a number of years, I had an opportunity to volunteer for Davis Community Meals and Housing. And so I started volunteering there back around 32, 33 years ago on Saturday, dealing with the soup kitchen on Saturdays over at St. Martin's Church. And it was kind of an intersection between some work I was doing as an attorney out in Fairfield, which was I was going out to the Correctional Medical Facility in Vacaville on a regular basis to represent inmates there who had major mental health issues. And so between that and going to the meals and suddenly looking around the room at St. Martin's those days when there's 40, 50, 60 people there, honestly, the folks who were there that I was seeing come to the meals were similar to a lot of the folks I was seeing in the state prison system. Mental health clients, had substance abuse issues, those types of things. And after volunteering there for a number of years, the opening came for Davis Community Meals to hire an executive director back in 2001. And so I willfully took the job. And at the time, Davis Community Meals had a shelter resource center at 1111 H Street. It operated a small home in downtown Davis that housed a homeless family. And it had the soup kitchen over at St. Martin's 2 days a week. And as I started that job, and I worked with folks in that transitional housing program, which was at the 1108 Street address, it came clear to me in a very short period of time, like a year or two, that we're getting folks who are on the streets, unhoused, we're getting them back into the employment field, we're getting the mental health treatment they need, the substance abuse treatment they need. But the opportunity for them to move out into and successfully transition to housing was very limited, especially in Davis because of the rents. And the vacancy rate, which was at that point declining rapidly. And so what I was seeing happening was that we were having successes, but they were moving to Woodland, they were moving to West Sac, they were moving to North Highlands, other places in the area besides Davis. And a couple of years after I started, I had an opportunity from a board member who had been one of the founders, Shoshana, who's here this evening. And her husband's name is Luke Watkins, and him and a gentleman named David Thompson had a partnership called Neighborhood Partners, who was an affordable housing developer. And they were looking at building an affordable housing complex close to the Chavez Plaza, which at the time they were going to get some financing rates to subsidize the building, and part of the financing, if they did it correctly, would subsidize it at an extremely low rate, but that they had to commit to having units in there to deal with extremely low income clients who were either unhoused or were at the risk of homelessness. And what happened was they came to me and said, "Howard, would you be interested in getting involved in this?" And I said, "That's a great opportunity. We can have some units under our control and move some folks from our programs into this housing program." And honestly, it opened in 2007, I believe. It's been wildly successful in the 17, 18 years it's been open. From there, I partnered again with Neighborhood Partners at Creekside in East Davis, which is 90 units of housing, affordable housing. 18 of those units were set aside for unhoused folks. There's also some other units set aside for folks with what was called getting to zero vouchers. And after we finished that, which that concluded and finished, and people started moving in 2020, back around 2017, a facility at 1111 8th Street, which was basically a couple of small homes that at some point in time was bought by DCMH and put into one large building, it was having 100 people come through there every day. And it was basically a rat hole. And so I was talking to people about ways to go about maybe knocking it down, building a little better facility. And what happened at the same time was there was a Davis Opportunity Village was talking to the city of Davis about building a tiny home village. And through conversations I was having with the city and Dove was having with the city of Davis, they put us in the same room and we came up with the idea of knocking down what we had at 1111 8th Street and building a facility that would encompass what we currently had at that program, which was like a day shelter and a transitional housing program, and also adding 18 units of housing for unhoused folks. And I'm sure there's a lot of faces in the audience I know who are familiar with that, but we did it in a very unusual manner for affordable housing. Was we basically, our goal was to raise money privately to fund the whole program. And we were pretty successful in that. I think about 75% of the funding eventually came from private donations and foundations. We did end up having to take some money from the city and the county because of COVID-related issues involving cost overruns and everything else related to the COVID pandemic. But we got it finished and opened in 2023, and as Tracy will tell you, it's a very successful program there. And so I retired from DCMH in late 2023 and started Yolo Community Builders. And our goal is to build housing similar to Paul's Place at various locations throughout Yolo County, Davis, Woodland, and West Sacramento. So.
I'm not going to stand up this entire time. I'm going to sit down. So now we'll get into the questions. So John Curry deals with land. Obviously, we need land if we're going to build housing. But let's talk a little bit about the importance of preserving agricultural land. How does that benefit the people of Yolo County and beyond?
Well, we start at it from the perspective that land lost to development is gone forever and can't be used to produce food and fiber that is necessary for the well-being of our community. And so, it is possible to have both, but you have to do it in a planned fashion. But, what does Yolo County look like, here, Yolo County agriculture look like here? And I just always like to suggest, this is what we grow here. So that our 7 most productive crops grown in Yolo County. Almonds grown in California represent 100% of the almonds grown for the United States. Processing tomatoes, grown here, number 2 crop. 95% of the processing tomatoes eaten in the United States are grown in California. The wine grapes, 80% of the wine grapes grown in the United States, or consumed in the United States, are grown here. Organic production, very important to many people. 40% of all the U.S. organic production is grown here in California, and it's the number 4 crop in California, all organic, or in Yolo County. Same thing with rice and pistachios and walnuts. All of these are significantly valuable crops in Yolo County and for the nation as a whole. And so that land that is protected in Yolo County produces that food that we need. That is our security, that is our well-being. It's here forever. Now, you do have to balance that with the needs of the community, and you do have to have a balanced perspective on growth. And just as what we do as a conservation easement, this is some of the tension that exists at how conservation easements are used. We purchase the development rights from a landowner. So a landowner who comes to us, they give up their rights to future subdivide that property, and nothing more than what they reserve can be built on that property. So even if you're immediately next to a city or a community, if a conservation easement is put on that farm, it has to stay a farm forever. Even if the city wants to go, they can't condemn it, they can't take it, they can't turn it into housing. And so it is one of those tension points that is in the relationship that we have. One of the reasons that protecting farmland has a public benefit, in addition to just the food and fiber that is guaranteed to be produced on it, is the way that California views its obligations to protect the climate is by reducing the production of greenhouse gases. And so the most intensive use and production of greenhouse gases is considered, one of those is considered urban, but not just the urban, it's everything associated with a denser, more population. And so the state has chose to fund preservation of farmland as a means, one means, to reduce the risk of future greenhouse gas production. But then they also look at farms as an opportunity to invest in the reduction of greenhouse gases produced by farming. And so there are programs that help farmers reduce those. So it's a balance of protecting the farm and enhancing the environment. So that's one of the additional aspects of it. And then many people just love the open space. Whether it's habitat or whether it's farmland, it's space between communities. We've invested, we being the land trust and our communities, in a physical separation between woodland and woods. That area in between, a lot of that land is productive, so those communities could never grow together and again preserve that open space and that vista. But I'll get to a little bit more in a minute of the intersection between housing and that. So I think finally, two of the other big benefits that farmland does protect and values it provides the community as a whole is we have this great example of the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area and the Yolo Bypass floodway. That land is farmed, a lot of it is farmed for both the benefit of species, but also the protection of our communities. That Yolo Bypass carries 4 times the amount of water than the Sacramento River does in a full flood stage. So without those protections in the ag land that it's on and still being farmed, those are risks that are mitigated. And fire, appropriately managed farmland and grazing lands, reduce the overall fire risk of a community and provide ecological value. I'm going to stop there before I talk about housing.
Okay. What are the rules governing the conversion of agricultural land to buildable land?
So I started to hint at that. So in Yolo County, starting back in the 90s, both the county, LAFCO, and then the city of Davis and Woodland all have adopted policies meant to protect more farmland or offset the use of farmland for urban development by protecting other farmland in the community. So for those communities and Yolo County as a whole, for every acre of land, whether it's for affordable housing projects or for a Walmart, every acre of land that is built upon, that becomes part of a city, has to be replaced with a protected land, at least 1 acre for every acre that is developed. And in some cases, you can see ratios as high as 3 acres of protected for every acre that is developed. So again, these things add costs, like all mitigation, to projects, but that is the trade-offs that, you know, our elected officials and the populace who have adopted these rules, adopted these types of rules, have placed on our communities. Yeah.
And specifically, affordable housing. Does preserving ag land have a particular impact on affordable housing, or is it sort of, you know, what you were saying, whether it's a Walmart or housing, it's all the same?
Protecting any land, you know, changes the balance of available lands depending on where it's located. So there is that, if you would, potentially negative impact on the future development, is that it is restricting future development and adding to the cost of the particular project. On the other side of that, though, you know, affordable housing for farmers and farm workers is a critical issue. And so as we look at a land trust, as we are working to protect farmland, we're also now, as everybody's acutely aware of, the affordable housing crisis really that exists out there, both for those in desperate need, but even those in the missing middle, that working class. You know, affordable housing and opportunities to have equity investments in housing is limited, particularly as you get outside of the community. There really is not any opportunities that exist out there, or farm worker housing specifically. And so there are a couple of organizations that we're in conversations with about what would affordable housing, equity-based housing look like in the rural portion of the county. And you know, how is it compatible to what we do with conservation easements, where really you're retiring the building rights. You know, a landowner is giving up their rights to subdivide their property, so now you're wanting to think about density housing on a property that you've protected from future subdivisions. All of a sudden, that fundamental assumption in what I used to call the plain vanilla conservation easement, it seems in contradiction to that. You know, you were trying to figure out a space where there's a different product that would allow farm worker housing, allow access for beginning farmers in this rural community, where it puts them out on the land in a density that is not typically associated with it. But what we don't want to create is typically a bunch of 5 acre, 2 acre houses that just become part of, you know, people moving out of the cities to have their piece of the country. You know, we want to balance those interests.
Thank you. This next question is for Ian. State law mandates that we build more housing in Yolo County cities. We have enough housing for upper income people. What we need is housing that middle, low, very low, and extremely low income people can afford. I'd like to ask first about affordable housing with a capital A. This is housing for very low and extremely low income people that is government subsidized. And this capital A affordable housing seems difficult to get built. What, in your experience, are the main obstacles? And can you explain something called the in lieu fee?
A lot wrapped up in that question, so I'm gonna try to answer. And before I answer, I do want to just say that if you didn't get here early, you know, hopefully you can stay after, and hopefully the folks who are tabling here can stay after, because we're up here talking, but you have a lot of experts that are not on this panel in here in the room that have their perspectives. They've done this work too, and each project is different, and so I just encourage folks to talk to each of the folks in this room, because every single project, every single provider approaches it in different ways. You already heard, Bill talk about how they approached Paul's Place and how that was very different than what you typically, see and hear with affordable housing. So I think to start, for capital A affordable, as you mentioned, capital A affordable is typically for your extremely low and very low income populations. Folks may hear of that as 30% to 50% AMI, or area median income. And just to give people a sense of what that means for Yolo County for 2026, a family of four, for extremely low income, 30%, the income threshold is $37,750. For 50%, very low, the income threshold for a family of four is $62,950. So when we're talking about that capital A affordable, we're talking about, literally, like it says, extremely low and very low income folks. It almost always, it's extremely rare if it doesn't come with some sort of public subsidy in order to not just build the housing, but maintain the housing. So for the Housing Authority, a couple of the main subsidy sources that we get that help with affordable housing in the community, I think we often hear, and when we're talking about affordable housing, people automatically think like multifamily, new construction, affordable housing. We have housing choice vouchers, or what folks often refer to as the Section 8 program, right? That's one of the most common forms of public subsidy I think people are familiar with for extremely low and very low income households. We have about 1,600 of those leased up at any given time in Yolo County, and that's about $1.9 million that we are paying to landlords throughout the community for extremely low and very low income individuals to remain housed through affordable housing apartment complexes. We also have 431 public housing units throughout Yolo County. Those are subsidized through HUD. The income and the payment for the families living in them works very similarly, except we don't get the same type of voucher subsidy as an owner of those properties that you would for a voucher program. So that's an aging infrastructure, and difficult to maintain, and HUD continues to disinvest in public housing, so it becomes more and more difficult to maintain, which is why we are trying to work to get out of public housing and build more voucher properties so that we can move those households in. When it comes to some of the main obstacles or difficulties, I think, talking with folks who have done it certainly a lot longer than I have in terms of building multifamily affordable housing, you used to be able to secure 1, 2, maybe 3 funding sources and build a project. Now, we're lucky if you get 5 funding sources and can build a project. And so with each of those funding sources, it comes with different requirements, different rules, different regulations, and that's on top of the rules and regulations that already apply for affordable housing. So as an example, there was a development a few years ago in West Sacramento, 1801 West Capitol. It's great development, great project. It serves a very, very need population, extremely low, very low income population, behavioral health, so mental health and substance use. They have wraparound services, so it's what's called permanent supportive housing. And there was, I believe, 9 different funding sources in that project, state, local, and federal. And so it's 85 units, and I was at the county side when we were helping to lease that up, and we started with a pool of about 400 to 500 people that we were serving at the county level when that opened up, thinking this will be no problem. We have 400 to 500 people that can move in here. When we did that initial lease up, it was a struggle to fill all 85 of those units because of the various requirements that were stacked on each unit for that population that had to meet certain requirements, income, chronic homeless versus just homeless, mental health and substance use, different timing around these different funding sources. And so I think as we see those projects that continue to need multiple funding sources to get built, it adds that layer of challenge and difficulty, not just to construct it, but then to find the population that meets all those criteria to move in. And I think, costs are certainly a barrier, and that's why we need so many funding sources now. I'm not sure how familiar folks are, but if I said that the average per unit cost for affordable housing to build in Yolo was anywhere from $500,000 to $700,000 per door, I don't know if that would surprise anyone or not, or if you're familiar with that. I often talk with folks about the fact that affordable housing is affordable for the end user, it's affordable for the people we're serving, it's not affordable to build. And a large reason why is because we have many different rules and regulations that we have to follow as affordable housing developers that market rate developers do not have to follow. There's different environmental rules and regulations related to CEQA and NEPA at a federal level if there's federal funding involved. And there's I believe it was a recent Cal Matters article that did a study that indicated for each additional funding stream that you add to a project, it was something around $35,000 additional dollars per door that adds because of these different rules and regulations and timelines associated with each one. So I think there's that different local, state, federal blending of funding that adds these challenges. I think when we talk about affordable housing, everybody automatically gets an image in their head, and so sometimes that image leads to things like NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard. And every affordable housing project is different, and every affordable housing project serves a different population. So I think a lot of the challenges we face as affordable housing developers is education with community members, hearing concerns, speaking about our specific project, what our project is going to do, what it will address, how it's going to help the community, what different aspects are going to be built as a part of that project. And hopefully that helps kind of reduce some of those barriers or that NIMBYism and get over that hurdle. But again, I think people automatically have this picture in their head about what capital A affordable housing is and the population it serves and what that brings with it. And then I think with that, this doesn't speak to the obstacles, but I think as you're looking at building housing, I think the population that you want to serve, the population that funding sources will allow to be served, have to be at the forefront of the discussions. And you also have to be thinking about whether you're doing affordable rental housing, which again is the typical, I think, image and thought that most folks think of when you think of capital A affordable. But when we're talking about affordable housing, we can also be talking about affordable ownership opportunities, right? And then the last piece was in lieu fees. So in lieu fees is an interesting one, and I'll say it's different by every jurisdiction. But at a high level, in lieu fees essentially say that if you have a market rate developer that wants to build a housing project, they have a few options to not build affordable as part of that project. They can pay an in lieu fee, and every jurisdiction has different in lieu fees set. But as an example, say a jurisdiction has a requirement that any new housing development has to have 10% of the units be affordable units. So if you're building a 200 unit new market rate project, you have to build 20 of those as affordable. Again, depending on the jurisdiction, it's different, but if they have in lieu fees and that's an option, then if it's $50,000 to pay an in lieu fee to not build those units and you can build 200 market rate units, that is much more economically viable for market rate developers because they can build those homes for cheaper than what an affordable unit will cost because of all the things that I just mentioned. That $50,000 is going to come out of their profit margin, but it's going to be way less than what it would cost to build. And so I know Davis, for example, in the last year or so, just revised their in lieu fee. And it's upwards of $215,000 now, I believe. Yeah. And so that is meant to hopefully incentivize developers to actually build the affordable units themselves. There's also in lieu fees options where they can dedicate land for future development. I would say, at least here in Yolo, the landscape around that option is changing. In the past, and we have a piece of land that was deeded to Yolo County Housing about 20 years ago or so as part of a rural development, and the land is not developable for affordable housing. But that land was deeded as the in lieu portion of that development for affordable, and as I said, it's not developable for affordable housing. So I think jurisdictions are taking a look at that as we face this housing crisis that John was mentioning. And you know, in some ways, I think that's kind of an interesting parallel, right? Because if we take away or limit the options for land dedication for future affordable that may never get built, we're making sure, for one, the housing gets built and we're not deeding land out in some random area in the country that maybe is better for, you know, crops or agriculture or something. So, yeah, I think I'll stop there, but I'm sure there'll probably be questions at the end.
I do have one more question for you right now, Ian, and that is, what capital A affordable housing projects are currently underway or have recently been approved or completed in Yolo County? What are some of the success stories or about to be success stories?
Now, let's see, we've got 1, 2, I think 3, yeah, we've got like 4 or 5 of the about to be completed or recently completed projects here in the room. So I have some written down, but I'll start in the room here. We've got Freeman Gardens. It's 12 units that is almost done with construction and will be leasing up next month and into May here in Woodland. Mosaic Village, 18 units, 20 units, that is in West Sacramento and is under construction right now. Davis Community Meals and Housing, you heard Bill mention earlier Paul's Place, that came online a couple years ago. The Paul's Place overall is 4 different stories. There's emergency shelter, transitional housing, and then the top 2 floors are permanent supportive housing, 18 units. And some of the projects that are underway or hopefully will be, you know, built soon. Bretton Woods in Davis has 2 different phases of affordable, totaling 150 affordable housing units. Phase 1 right now is essentially ready to go, but needs the remainder of their funding to actually break ground. And so in a later answer, I'll talk about kind of some advocacy and another Cal Matters article that I think will be helpful for folks to, you know, to hopefully understand. And 19 of those Bretton Woods 75 units will be serving extremely low and very low incomes and have project-based vouchers from the Housing Authority. New Hope, our nonprofit, in partnership with some 2 development partners, broke ground in January on a 37-unit affordable housing project in West Sacramento. It's 1 on-site manager's unit and 36 rental units. All of them have project-based vouchers. 18 of them will serve individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities in partnership with Alta California Regional Center. 4 of them will serve veterans through our what's called our VASH voucher program, and then the others will be general, extremely low, very low income folks. And I think those are the ones I am aware of upcoming that are like shovels in the ground, you know, gonna be leasing up soon.
Thank you. So this next question is for Bill, because you apparently have done your building, Cesar Chavez, Creekside, Paul's Place, all supportive housing built in Davis for unhoused people. You've done that with very little government money. Why did you make that choice? And how were you able to build the projects?
Well, Paul's Place was done with very little government money. The other 2 were typical affordable housing developments. I mean, Cesar Chavez was an affordable housing development, got HCD funding, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, tax credits, and a whole range of other type of financing to build it. We were able to include, like I said, there's 19 units set aside for ELI, extremely low income folks. We either had to be unhoused or at risk of being unhoused. Creekside, the other one was, oh, thank you. The other project, Creekside, was built in pretty much the same way. There was a multitude of funding sources. I think Creekside had 8 or 9, if I'm not mistaken. A variety of things, some from the State Department of Housing and Community Development, some tax credit financing, some affordable home program funding from the Federal Home Loan Bank, and other funding options. And then, of course, there was Paul's Place, which we did, and we made a conscious choice to do that with all private money. We started off with that idea, at least. And that was, the decision was made for a couple of different reasons. One was doing a typical affordable housing development is about as complex a thing as you can imagine doing, frankly. I still tell people the story of when, when we would build Creekside, I was a partner in the Creekside development as Davis Community Meals Director. And there was 2 other partners there, the John Stewart Company and Neighborhood Partners. And as a managing general partner, I had the responsibility to go in there and basically sign all the closing documents of that. And when I went in there to sign, it was at the Wells Fargo Bank building up on, I don't know what floor it was, the 1920 floor, the big conference room. I sat there for 6 hours and signed roughly 80 to 100 different documents. And there must have been no less than 50 to 70 attorneys coming throughout the room at different points in time from different funding sources with all these different documents to sign. And frankly, building that kind of affordable housing is wonderful, but it's extremely complex. It's actually a little niche industry of just doing that kind of work. I mean, there's Mutual Housing California, as you know, CHOC, which was active in Davis for many years. There's other organizations. Mercy Housing is typical of developing those types of properties. It's a very complex, very labor-intensive, and the housing that's put forth is wonderful. It's putting affordable housing into the communities, which is essential, but it's also very expensive to build. And there's some reasons for that. And one is they have to abide by a whole range of laws that increase their costs, like prevailing wage, like Davis-Bacon. Other issues that increase the cost of those units so that, like Ian mentioned, $500,000 to $700,000 per unit is pretty much the going rate in Yolo County now. When you get outside of Yolo County, you get down to LA where they're doing the same types of housing, you're talking $1 million per unit, if not more, at this point. Frankly, that's really not sustainable. I mean, we're never going to build the housing we need for the folks who are unhoused or the folks who need a workforce housing at that kind of commitment, cost commitment. So when we started Paul's Place, there was a couple of reasons we did that. One was, we had, the biggest thing probably was that the Sutter Health Foundation at the time had a big grant program called the Getting to Zero program. And they gave us $2.5 million to raise money to make Paul's Place happen. We had to go out into the community and raise the balance to meet the matching requirement. And like I said earlier, when we started building Paul's Place, we got going, we got the construction going, and then the pandemic hit. And our construction costs, which I think our estimate was somewhere around $4.5 million initially, suddenly ballooned to over $6 million. And it was like, where are we going to come up with that money? And luckily, what happened was that at the time of the pandemic, they came out with something called the ARP program from the federal government, which gave large cash subsidies to both the county and the cities. And we were able to apply to the city of Davis and also the county of Yolo, and they both gave us approximately $1 million apiece to close the funding gap we needed to build the program. But the other good thing about doing this one was our cost per unit for that program is still incredibly low. Even under the worst scenario, it's about $220,000 a unit. Now, we built something there called micro-housing, which is typical, not your typical apartment unit. I mean, my units over at Cesar Chavez, my units at Creekside, 550 to 600 square feet. My units at Paul's Place were 300 square feet, plus or minus 10 or 15 square feet, depending on unit you were in. They were all self-contained. And in my mind, at least with the population I was dealing with the unhoused population, dealing with mental health, substance abuse issues, other types of issues, having something that was self-contained for them was vitally important in my mind. I mean, I know I've talked around the community, and the chair of HPAC this year, so I'm familiar with a lot of different housing things going on throughout the communities. But a lot of folks do programs that are much like a board and care home. There's different bedrooms, and there's common bathrooms, common kitchens, and everything else. And my experience is for a lot of the folks who are unhoused moving into that type of housing, it's not a successful placement for them because the issues they have don't necessarily get along with the issues the other folks in the house have. So getting them successfully housed is a real challenge. And I know I've told folks a story about somebody I knew in downtown Davis where my office was located for many years, and he was bouncing in and out of programs like that because every time he moved in there, the guy next door to him would come to him after 3 weeks in there and say, hey, let's go out and have a good time. And of course, that's what he did, and of course, then he got evicted again, and then get back in the street, and then they're placing him back somewhere else. And so, in my mind at least, having somebody in a unit that's their own, that they can shower there, they can cook for themselves, they can make their opportunity to be socialization with other folks something voluntary in their part. And I think that was really the most successful thing about Cesar Chavez and Creekside, is that when we did those programs, we had staffing on site who worked with them on a continual basis, a place for people to go in when they needed help, go down, talk to staff, get help with whatever it is they could need. It could be as minor as, I need help getting some food this month. And so, and like Cesar Chavez and Creekside, there's like steak drops off food pretty much once a week, so there's places that you can go down every day and get food there. To making a mental health appointment, to getting services for something, to having somebody come in and say, can you help me clean up here because the manager is going to come in and give me a bad report if they come in and do an inspection because my place is pretty dirty. So it's that type of service that was crucial, but it's also crucial to have them in their own units, so it led to a much better success rate in my mind at least. People there's still people at Cesar Chavez who moved there back in 2007, 2008, they're still there. And that's incredible, frankly. And so when we did Paul's Place, my idea was to do this tiny units, but they were self-contained. And we did a few things there to kind of increase the space, at least in their minds. So if you ever went to, I'm sure some folks have been to tours here. The rooms are small, but there's this big hallway, like 18, 20 feet wide. And we got tables and chairs and seats and TVs out there. And, they have potlucks to do this, to do that. It's a place to go out and socialize. There's a yard they can go out and socialize in. And so, building it was like, that was one of the goals. But the other goal too was that, I think he had mentioned this briefly, is that when you're doing the big A affordable housing and you're getting tax credit money, you're getting state money, every one of them comes up with a whole lengthy list of eligibility requirements that sometimes are not friendly to folks who've been unhoused. Ian will tell you this, you've got a drug conviction and the housing program has HUD funding, can't house them. If some funding streams will not let you have, if you have an eviction, you reckon, can't house them then. If you've got credit to debt ratio that's too high, if you've got X, Y, and Z, the list just goes on and on, you can't put them anywhere. I know years ago, I remember there was a gentleman in downtown Davis who had been homeless in town, I think for a year and a half, and he moved into H Street, and he went through the transitional housing program there, and he applied for an apartment over on J Street in Davis, and he qualified, he had the income as a low-income apartment, and then he discovered that in some time, about a year before he was applied, he got an anti-camping ticket from the city of Davis because he was sleeping in the garage next to the theater on F Street. And they denied him his housing based upon that. That was part of his, issue there. And so, we eventually got him in there, luckily, but we had to get attorneys involved to get that done. So it's like some of those rules and regulations really kind of discriminated against your goal here, which is to get these folks off the street into something permanent where they can have better health outcomes, have a safer life, and hopefully thrive in the community again. So that was one of the main reasons we did Paul's Place. It was a cost thing, one, but it was micro housing, but it allowed folks to have a great, safe place to live again. So.
Okay, this question is for Ian. Oh yes, I thought it was very important to get to this one about builder's remedy. because we talked about how the state mandates that we follow through with what our housing element says we are supposed to be building for various levels of income. If we don't meet the state mandates for housing, something called builder's remedy becomes a possibility. Can you explain what that could mean for cities in Yolo County?
Back to that in just a second. I want to go back and add on to what Bill and I were talking about too, because there used to be things in jurisdictions called redevelopment agencies, and they helped immensely with building and creating affordable housing. As an example, the Davis Redevelopment Agency had 7 homes in Davis that, as it was closing down, they deeded to Yolo County Housing for affordable ag rental properties. So we have 7 properties now. We've had them for almost 20 years that are very affordable rental properties for individuals that have at least 50% of their income coming from ag work. And so there are ways where you can do one-time investments to purchase properties and deed them to somebody that is going to maintain them in perpetuity as affordable rental without having to do this new construction. So I just wanted to add that layer to kind of the conversation. I actually don't know that I'm the best person to answer the builder's remedy question, so I apologize. But yeah, my very naive understanding of it is that, yeah, essentially the state can step in and say, jurisdiction, you are not doing enough to meet the goals in your housing element or in the goals that we've set, for your jurisdiction. And so we are gonna force approval of certain projects in your jurisdiction. You don't have the same rights to kind of hold up different projects in your jurisdiction. So I apologize, I don't know more than that.
Does anyone else want to chime in?
My limited knowledge is this, is kind of, I know the Department of Housing and Community Development has been very active the last few years in doing that in some jurisdictions locally. I think the one that comes to mind most is probably Elk Grove. I know they had some development that the city had denied that should have been approved, and I know HCD threatened to sue them. I think there was a settlement, but I know that's happening different places. I know the city of Davis has gotten some rather ominous letters from the HCD about some of their housing element issues. I think Woodland has gotten actually the stamp of approval for all the housing element issues. I don't know about West Sacramento though. So I know it's an enforcement tool that I think has to be used somehow. As I look at the landscape, I mean, folks who become unhoused, folks who end up in the low-income stream that need this type of housing, many of them, they come from all walks of life and all communities. And every community has an obligation, in my mind at least, to shoulder some of the burden somehow. Yet I think if you go around and you look at what's happened like in some of the communities in East Bay, Atherton, Black Hawk, a few other places like that, I mean, those things, the same issues that happened for the unhoused in Woodland and Davis and other places, the folks who are in the lower income levels, that's happening there, but they're not shouldering their burden. Their choice is that they don't want to affect their property values. And so I think it's an obligation of the state to step in there and make folks do some portion of that obligation, some kind of sharing of the responsibility to kind of care for these folks in some way, shape, or form. It shouldn't really just fall on all the low-income communities and locally, and that there should be some places that I know, that all the low-income folks tend to congregate. It should be something that's kind of spread around communities. I think in my mind at least, I know Sacramento's been dealing with, where to site affordable housing and their shelter programs and everything else for the last 7, 8, 9 years, and it's not been a successful conversation, frankly. So I'm assuming they've got some issues with some of those things, but, I think it's something that everybody has to shoulder the burden of it somehow, so.
I will just add, since you mentioned kind of that, it's almost a stick, right, that the state has when you think about carrots and sticks. While it's not related to builder's remedy, there are a couple other sticks that the state has that they can utilize. One, first comes as a carrot, and then if you don't perform, comes as a stick, and that is what's called pro-housing. So jurisdictions can apply, they have to meet certain criteria, and if HCD approves them, they're considered a pro-housing designated community and jurisdiction. Every year, there's certain funding set aside at the state level for those jurisdictions to apply for. And the first year you get granted, you basically have first rights at the funding available in that round. In future years, you have to compete for those dollars. If you don't meet enough of the goals or continue to do some of the pro-housing policies that you set out and were approved for, there has been at least one county in California that had their pro-housing designation removed. So with that, there are certain state applications that you get bonus points for if you're a pro-housing designated community. And so Woodland recently became pro-housing designated community last year. They got it approved. That was extremely beneficial for a joint application that we were submitting with the City of Woodland and with Yolo Transportation District for a funding opportunity called the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Grant. You got 2 bonus points on that application if you were a pro-housing jurisdiction. And so that was very critical. It's a very competitive grant, and so I have no doubt that that helped us get across the finish line as an example. The other thing HCD has started doing as kind of their stick is that if you get funding and you don't perform on that funding, not only do they recapture it, but they will threaten and sometimes issue what are called negative points. So if you get negative points issued as an organization, when you're going to apply for HCD funding in the future, you get points reduced from your application, and so you are less competitive moving forward. And again, if you think back to like those challenges of building, having to stack together 7, 8, 9, however many funding sources that you get over a period of time, and they all have different timelines, and you have to try to cobble them all together to make these projects work. Sometimes those timelines don't work out, and it's not the fault of the jurisdiction, it's not the fault of the developers, it's not, it just doesn't always come together in time. And so there's been a lot of conversation at a state level about the negative points and, awarding that, and if that is fair and just given the climate, that we have for building affordable housing in California.
So I have more questions here, but we are getting really close to the time when I want to take audience questions. So if those of you in the audience have written questions on your card, please let someone know. Judy is coming around to collect some. Stephanie is coming around to collect some. And for the folks who are up here, if I didn't get to a question that you think is really important while we're collecting those, if there's something else you think it's important for the audience to know, go for it.
We talked about capital A affordable, but there's also lower A affordable, which is often you may hear workforce housing or missing middle housing. It's often thought of as that kind of 80% to 120% AMI. It's often folks who are in education or work for cities or counties or school districts, and there's some different funding sources out there, but the majority of the funding for building affordable housing at a national level and at a state level is typically for that capital A population. There are very few dedicated state funding sources that allow you to utilize them to build for that lowercase a, that missing middle or workforce housing. But there are some models that you can build that missing middle affordable housing without having to go out and seek a whole bunch of other funding. We are partnered on a development in Davis, which we hope will get their financing sometime this year and be able to break ground. And we use this on a development in West Sacramento. But essentially, it is when there's a market rate developer, they can partner with somebody like a housing authority who's a government entity to provide subsidy into the project, have a regulatory agreement on that property to deed restrict the units for 80% AMI or below when the households move in, and they can increase their income up to 100% AMI and still qualify. And they have has to be a nonprofit partner in the ownership of the development. If you do all those things, the Board of Equalization says that you can apply for and receive a property tax exemption for those units, which means that the owner does not have to pay property taxes on those specific units, which drops the overall cost for them, and so they can naturally have those be more of that missing middle workforce units, charge a more reasonable rent, and still make their projects pencil.
And so are the projects that are lowercase a affordable, are they just not nearly as profitable for the developer to build, the private developer? Is that why we're also having this big missing middle?
I think the missing middle is really the result of just not developing it much at all the last number of years. As I think I've explained to folks over the years, in my mind at least, the housing crisis in this state has happened because development has been very slow the last 20, 30, 40 years. And just by the factor of aging and other things, that the older housing stock wasn't able to really age. I mean, a lot of times in a lot of places in the community, in the United States, lots of housing being built, and the older housing becomes the lower income housing by default. I mean, the buildings get older, the shower's not so nice, the kitchens are a little less than they used to be. I mean, they might have been state of the art back in 1965, but nowadays it's 2025, 2026, it's not a great place anymore. So the rent's naturally lower there. But because the housing stock has not grown enough, and just specifically in Davis, but other communities as well, those units that are older have not aged that way. I mean, there's still high rent apartments. I know, we were doing Paul's Place. One of the funny things that happened was that at the time, Paul's Place is located between two of the older complexes in Davis. I think one's called University, and there's another one next to it. And while we were building there, getting ready to go there, they knew it. They were out there refurbishing the front of the units to make them look nice and everything else to keep the rents up. So, because Davis doesn't develop a lot of housing and a lot of affordable housing, the prices are going up. Anybody knows in Davis, I mean, the average price of a home there is now somewhere close to $900 million. And rental prices are for a one-bedroom unit, $2,500 to $3,000 a month. So, and that's not showing a lot of sign of weakening. I know the last few years in Davis, the vacancy rate's gone up a little bit. I think that's to do with West Village being developed and maybe less demand for housing in town. But, housing stock that's not allowed to grow and age and become the lower rent areas means there isn't that middle there anymore.
Okay, do we have some questions from the audience that are ready? All right. This is a question for John. Wait a second. I'm going to go with one where the handwriting is a little easier to read. This one's for Ian. What is the scale of the problem of the unhoused in Yolo County? How much housing is needed?
A great question, whoever wrote it. I'm sure many people are wondering the answer. So I can't give an exact number, an exact answer, but what I can say is that the community just conducted its biannual point-in-time count. Every 2 years, there is a homeless count of the sheltered and unsheltered population. So that was just conducted at the end of January. The teams that did it are working on reviewing the information. There's a lot of kind of data validation and review that have to happen. I would anticipate maybe April or so, the report may be published around that. The 2024 report, if I remember right, had 932 individuals, combined sheltered and unsheltered in Yolo County. I think historically folks have recognized that that's, the point in time count is exactly that, it's a point in time, and they're undercounted. So I think that's always a challenging question to answer. We do have assessments that we do on the homeless system of care, and looking at the last 2 years of data based on the scoring that is done when the assessment is completed. There were 325 individuals that scored at meeting permanent supportive housing in Yolo County. The next step is to look at that data and compare those names with individuals who may be in some sort of housing right now to see how much overlap there is, and that will hopefully give us, you know, that kind of gap number. But that's just for permanent supportive housing. So that's affordable, subsidized housing for folks that have typically mental health or substance use and need those wraparound services.
Okay. I have deciphered this one. John, are the farms you work with concerned, the farmers you work with, concerned about housing their workforce now and in the future?
It is a topic of conversation that we have often. The availability of on-farm housing, you know, just rural housing generally has declined as farms have consolidated. You think about, you know, 50 years ago, you know, the amount of rural housing stock that was out there was a lot greater than what it is today. And so there's been this natural decline in rural housing, and so now you're faced with this access to labor, which is their major concern, particularly as you move away up the Cape Valley and other areas. You know, people are driving farther to work and not having that available housing. It is a significant concern that is discussed on a regular basis.
Can I add to that a little bit? I'm sorry, and add to my last answer because I forgot. I have data at my organization that would help answer the question that was asked me. And we have, so for our Housing Choice Voucher Program, we have about 4,700 people on our wait list in Yolo County. And for our public housing program, we have about 5,200 people on the wait list. And going back to ag or farm worker housing, we operate 3 seasonal migrant centers of the state's 24. There's 232 units total there. Folks stay typically April to October, sometimes into November, December. And there's currently a statewide farm worker housing assessment being done by UC Davis, California Coalition of Rural Housing, and HCD that's meant to help inform some of those questions of how much the need is out there and what types of housing, even how many of the seasonal migrant center units should maybe be converted into permanent units. And they've now set up a rule starting this season where our residents get priority for what's called Joe Cerna farm worker affordable housing units. So like Spring Lake in Woodland has a Joe Cerna funded project. Our folks will get referred there and put to the top of the wait list if they want to remain in the community long-term in affordable units. And there's also a, going back to that AMI and the income, I think I've had conversations with some farmers who want to meet that need. And when they look at those income limits, remember 30% AMI for a household of 4 is $37,000. They say, I'm never gonna pay my workers that little to qualify for that. And so a lot of the affordable housing we wanna do for them, the farm workers don't meet enough to pay market rate or buy their own homes, but they don't make so little that they qualify for a lot of these funding sources.
Okay, thanks. This is a question for Ian. Where does the in lieu fee go? How is it used? What percentage of builders pay the in lieu fee rather than build the actual units?
I feel like there's some plants in the audience tonight. It depends. I'm sorry that continues to be the answer, but it depends because it's different for each jurisdiction. Each jurisdiction uses them in varied ways. They can use them to pay for homeless services. They could use them to fund, for example, like the Respite Center in Davis. West Sacramento, I know, uses some of the fees they get to help fund their homeless outreach team and some of the interim housing that they do through their motels that they have over in West Sacramento. It can be used for filling gap funding for affordable housing. So as I mentioned, we broke ground in January on a 37-unit project in West Sacramento. We secured 6 or 7 different funding sources. From the time we built the construction budget with a contractor, applied for the tax credits, which was our last round of funding that we needed to the time that we were ready to go. Cost had increased and the tax credits weren't quite what we were hoping that we would win, and so we had a $2.8 million gap to close that project. And so the city of West Sacramento stepped in and loaned that $2.8 million to the project so we could break ground and get that project going. That's partly due to their in lieu fees, but in West Sac in particular, they also passed about a decade ago a Measure E tax measure, which is largely for housing and homeless funding. And so they fund their housing and homeless projects through that, and that's one of the reasons why, in addition to in lieu fees, they were in a position where they could say, yes, we can loan this $2.8 million into your project and make it happen. That doesn't currently exist in every jurisdiction in Yolo County. In fact, I think Measure E in West Sac is the only one I'm aware of that there is a dedicated tax measure for housing and homelessness. But the in lieu fees can be, used for that. Each jurisdiction varies widely. I believe Davis's in lieu fee is the highest in the county currently.
Okay. Affordable housing for seniors is very limited and getting more critical. Are you aware of additional housing for seniors that is in the planning stage and it's directed to anybody?
I think some of the Brettonwood units are dedicated to seniors. I know there is some housing being opened in Woodlands by an organization called the Bay Area Community Services. I think they're going to be opening sometime this summer. And I know the units in Woodland, I think there's 12 units in Woodland. It's a kind of like a board and care home. Is dedicated to housing unhoused seniors 55 and above. That currently exists in Davis, at least. I know there's Eleanor Roosevelt. There's a few other communities dedicated to seniors. The Shasta Point community, the University Retirement Center, and a few others, but I don't know of anything else at this point.
Yeah, Brettonwood certainly, it has 2 affordable phases for seniors. There are each 75 unit phases, and the first one needs the rest of the financing to break ground. So it's going to be critical for them to find that. We have a 47 unit senior disabled complex here in Woodland that our nonprofit New Hope owns. And one of our West Sacramento public housing sites is dedicated for seniors. We're doing a large project in Woodland, which I didn't add into the conversation here because it's a longer term project. It's very nuanced. We've gotten great partnership with the city of Woodland. The first phase of that is what I mentioned earlier, won that big Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities grant. One of the future phases of that, we plan to have dedicated senior units in one of the future phases, but that's years away. So in terms of getting shovels in the ground right now, Brettonwoods is the best option for new housing that I'm aware of.
Okay, this is for Ian or Bill. What barriers or opportunities do you see in the pipeline for housing, specifically for transition age youth, age 18 to 24? This could be shelter, transitional living, or permanent supportive housing. So what do you see in the pipeline for transition age youth?
I actually don't know many at this point, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Not in the pipeline. We have 26 vouchers that are called FUP vouchers, Family Unification Program vouchers. A handful of those are dedicated to youth that are exiting the foster care system and qualify for a voucher, so they can utilize that. HUD put requirements on that they can only utilize that voucher for 3 years of assistance. And so one of the things we did recently was we changed what's called our admin plan. It's our rules and regulations that govern our general voucher program. Say that anybody that loses assistance as a result of funding, which this would qualify for, automatically goes to the top of our wait list, so that hopefully they can get on a different type of voucher before they lose that assistance. The only other thing that I can think of is the HAP rounds typically require, 7%?
They require some funding to go to transition age youth programs, but not necessarily housing programs.
So that's a state funding source that comes out. There's been 6 rounds. There's going to be a 7th round proposed this year, but got cut from $1 billion statewide down to 500 million, and each jurisdiction, they're required to spend 7% on transition age youth. That's typically homeless services, not necessarily housing.
And this question isn't directed to anybody in particular. How do projects that combine extremely low-income housing with middle class or more well-off work out? Are these mixed populations working out together?
Yeah, there's a property in Woodland called West Beamer Place. It's a partnership. Yolo County Housing owns the land. Our nonprofit, along with Mercy, developed the property. It's 80 units. 20 of them are permanent supportive housing units for individuals with mental health. The rest are just general affordable units, often families living in there. And any new affordable, especially permanent supportive housing affordable, you're gonna see a kind of a storming and norming phase in the lease up. And you know, if you look across the nation at permanent supportive housing projects, you usually see about an 18 to 24 month period where, you know, you're having maybe additional police calls, you're having, you know, turnover in the units, but then you see the property stabilize over time. And it makes sense, right? Especially if you're bringing folks with complex needs into the same place all at once. You're typically doing lease up very fast to fill your units. There's going to be challenges, and so you got to work through those challenges. You got to work through the supports. You hope that all of them are able to make it and stay and aren't evicted, but sometimes that happens. But after that storming norming phase, West Beamer and Woodland's been very successful, and again, it's 80 total units. 20 of them are permanent supportive housing, and 60 are just general affordable units.
As representatives of land, housing, and builders, what do you think needs to be done to fix the complexity of providing affordable housing? Is it regulation, laws from the county, the city, the state?
I think it's a combination of a lot of different things, frankly. It's regulations, it's the attitude of the community you're building in, it's funding, it's a pretty wide-ranging topic there, frankly. I mean, I know we've briefly talked about NIMBYism, but that's a huge issue in many situations of trying to build affordable housing in communities, depending upon how you're doing it. And so I know you get a lot of generally negative feedback from neighbors a lot of times about building these types of projects in their communities. So that's one of the big issues, I think. And I think it's really just, like I said before, it's kind of just in looking at what the state's doing now with the enforcement provisions is just trying to get everybody to kind of understand they have to share the burden of taking care of everybody and of building the affordable housing to house the folks in their community. I mean, even in a town like Davis, I mean, where the housing prices have gone up and up and up, what's I think's happened is that even if you're working in the downtown, if you're going to the Starbucks or the coffee shop in downtown, the person is making $20, $22 an hour, they probably can't afford to live by themselves in Davis anymore. And that's an issue in my mind. I mean, the folks who are doing you're cleaning your clothes, doing your yard work, you're working in your local grocery stores, if they can't live in your community, that to me is a problem. It should be, Davis, at one time, I moved there in '84, it was a much different community than it is now, which is mostly professors, doctors, lawyers, and upper income folks with a lot of advanced degrees. So I think communities have to take an attitude that's kind of be welcoming to everybody, frankly.
Yeah, I would say I think there's things that can be done around zoning requirements and approval processes and stuff. There's been lots of CEQA reform in California the last couple of years through legislation. When I talk to city planners and we're getting our permits approved and everything, they haven't really done much in terms of streamlining or reducing cost or anything. Are we done at 8? Is that when we're done? Okay, so maybe I'll use this question as an opportunity for some advocacy, because I think there's some at a state level and a federal level, and Yeah, so there's likely going to be a housing bond in November on the ballot in California. There's a website called housingbondca.com, very easy to find. It's going to be a $10 billion housing bond, and the majority of the funding is going to programs that HCD operates called the Multifamily Housing Program. Cal HFA is another state organization that has a down payment assistance program for affordable home ownership opportunities, portfolio reinvestment program. So you heard Bill mention like a lot of this aging, infrastructure for these affordable housing, getting funding to rehab those so they can maintain their affordability, but also be safe and and healthy homes to live in. The governor's January budget, and don't want to stress anyone out or freak anybody out because this has happened before, but the governor's January proposed budget currently has $0 new of housing in it. That's happened in years past, and by the May revise, several $100 million is put in there, but I think that's an opportunity for anyone in this room who wants to continue to see affordable housing get built to advocate. You've heard me mention Bretton Woods a couple times, and I referenced a Cal Matters article earlier. There's an article that came out this Monday that looked at all of the different applications for affordable housing throughout the state and determined that there are 40,000 units ready to get shovels in the ground in California right now, but they are missing that last gap funding. And the estimate is that $4 billion would be taken to get those projects in. And so as we think of this $10 billion housing bond, one of the things I'm talking about, the organizations that I'm in, is, hey, can we carve out $4 billion of that $10 billion to get these projects funded? They have their permits approved, they got every other funding source they need that last tranche of funding to actually be built. So let's get those going, clear that pipeline, and then start and see where we're at. And I know I'm over time, so I apologize. But I have to take this opportunity. The majority of our funding comes from the federal government. In January, while the 2026 HUD budget got passed, it cut $800 million from the public housing program nationwide. So that's going to be a several $100,000 cut to our program here in Yolo County for those 60 and 70-year-old units that we occupy. There's also an extremely troubling proposed rule for HUD-funded programs that there's an advocacy opportunity to submit public comment before April 21st. They have a proposed rule out right now that no HUD assistance could go to mixed status families anymore if this goes through. Mixed status families are families who have both legal residents and non-legal residents in the family. So the way it works right now is, say a family of 4 qualifies for a voucher program. 3 are legal US citizens, 1 does not have eligible status, it's prorated. So if they qualified for $1,000 of assistance, 3 family members, they would get $750 in assistance. If this rule goes through, that family would be ineligible for any assistance. And for our programs alone, that'd be 111 individuals in Yolo County that would lose their assistance and likely result in homelessness. So we asked about the question earlier about what's the need and what are the homeless numbers. That would immediately result in 111 individuals in Yolo County losing their housing if that rule goes through. So please, I have cards with me. If you're interested in submitting public comment, contact me. I can get you the federal registry. I can get you some letters that our state and national organizations are submitting opposing that rule. And wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that and take that opportunity. So I apologize, I was over time, but these are some critical things that are happening right now that we can't do more if we don't stop the bleeding in the first place.
Okay, I think I have time for one more question. Could you say more about affordable ownership?
I don't do ownership, that's for sure, so.
Yeah, there's different opportunities. It's challenging, but as I mentioned, if that bond goes through, it will renew funding from a state program that Cal HFA operates for down payment assistance. It typically has been for families at 120% or below AMI, and certain criteria, like they have to be first-time home buyers. So no one in the family could have bought a home in the last 3 years to qualify. There's some other funding that goes to counties and jurisdictions called PLHA, or Permanent Local Housing Allocation Funding. My understanding of future allocations for that is that at least 40% of the funding that every jurisdiction gets has to go to what they call affordable owner workforce housing. So also up to 120% area median income, but could be used for down payment assistance, could be used for purchasing homes that then get sold at an affordable rate. They come with, deed restrictions and resale requirements. Those are the main ones that I'm aware of that are available for home ownership outside of programs like Habitat for Humanity, right? There's programs like that. There's self-help enterprises that does very similar work to what Habitat for Humanity does. And so I think figuring out how to use some local funding to partner with organizations like that and find land. I was just actually talking with some county folks about some land we own in Esparto and trying to have this, a partnership like this happen to get some of these lots developed they're too small to do multi-unit, multi-family housing, but they'd be perfect for something like a self-help enterprise or self-help housing or a Habitat for Humanity to kind of build these, affordable ownership opportunities. And then I don't know if every jurisdiction does this, but I know like Davis, for example, they have several homes that in their affordable housing portfolio, and when they come up for sale, there's a wait list of individuals that have to be contacted when that home is up for sale, and there's deed restrictions on that to maintain the affordability.
Okay, it looks like I have time for actually one more question. There are a number of housing projects. How do they coordinate?
I'm not sure they coordinate with who, though. I guess that's my question.
With each other, I think.
I don't necessarily know there's too much interaction between most housing projects, frankly. I mean, if you've got a housing project owned by maybe the same owner in different places that serve the same population, then maybe. Like Cesar Chavez, which our partner is New Hope Development, which is Ian's organization. The Cesar Chavez partner, I know there was some interrelationship with Elder Roosevelt Circle, which was built by a different organization, but not too far away, serving a senior population. They basically co-developed at the same time. And so there was some relationship there because they had a commonality at one time of property management and other folks, but most of the time they pretty much operate independently.
Okay. Thank you to our speakers for all you have shared with us. And thank you to our audience members who have taken an interest and taken the time to come out tonight. Thank you to Woodland TV for putting this, not only live streaming it, but it will be available for viewing later if you just go to Woodland TV. If you know somebody who would like to see what was said here tonight, you can refer them to that. If you want to go back and just relive the whole experience, you can do it yourself. And of course, thank you for the Woodland Community and Senior Center for allowing us to hold this here tonight. And one more thank you to my co-chair, Mary Jo Bryan. Without her knowledge, guidance, hard work, and enthusiasm, this program would not have been possible.
Very nice of you. Kate's idea, and she got it going. But I really want to bring your just attention again and thank the six organizations, agencies that are out here demonstrating to you that what local communities can do to help with the solution of homelessness and affordability. And I'm really happy that they all came out here, and I hope you will take the time before you leave and get refreshments, which are going to be available, before you leave, to talk to them and get some resources and possibly do volunteer times. I also want to thank our two partnering organizations, Davis Community Action Network and Interfaith Housing, we do join with them to put together educational forums and opportunities for the community. So I want to thank them all. So enjoy the refreshments and safe drive home, okay? Thank you.
I don't have a handout for where to hand, but if you email me, I'll send you the link to the federal registry where you can submit the quick comment. I can send you the draft letter that we're submitting, and I will send you all the stuff I mentioned in that. Wednesday, but I can definitely look at my. Do you want to email me directly? I know you said you went through the website, but now that's my direct email, phone number, cell phone, everything. So yeah. Thank you. That's my card, so if you email me, I can send you the link to the federal registry. I can